Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
July 1969. 70% of today's Americans were not even born or were too young to remember this historic event.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And yet, most of us know those famous words and recognize these famous names. But there's a lot more about the Apollo missions author Charles Fishman bets you probably don't know.
We always tell the moon story from the perspective of the astronauts, and that's totally understandable. But I wanted to tell the story of going to the moon from the perspective of the people back on Earth who had to do the work, because that's not a well-told story. Ordinary Americans rose to the occasion in this remarkable way, and they're the ones who got us to the moon.
410,000 ordinary Americans worked on the Apollo missions, and plenty of them had stories just waiting for this former Washington Post space reporter to tell.
He's one of these great figures that is not actually well known in American history and should be. There's not a single book written about him.
Fishman talks about that quirky Missourian, plus several other men and women working in this time of innovation on demand, brought on by this famous 1961 speech.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Hard was an understatement. We didn't have a rocket strong enough, a computer powerful enough, or spacesuits sturdy enough to send people to the moon. It all had to be dreamed up by Americans quickly.
That is what is so impressive. A lot of work back on Earth was done by hand.
And that's what's fun, because it's people that we all can kind of relate to, right? Because
exactly. Ordinary Americans sort of rose to the occasion in this remarkable way, and they're the ones who got us to the moon, right? The astronauts flew the spaceships, but they didn't build the spaceships. They didn't design the spaceships. They didn't imagine the spaceships.
LOL, not laugh out loud, the little old ladies.
The little old ladies. So the most amazing example of this sort of high-tech equipment that was made by hand is, in fact, the computer. Those computers were the smallest, fastest, most advanced computers that had ever been created at that moment. But we didn't actually have the technology to manufacture the circuitry. And so the wiring of the computers, the programming, was woven by hand, as you say, by women who got the nickname little old ladies, the LOL ladies, in a factory in Waltham, Massachusetts. They weren't old. Most of them were clearly in their 30s or 40s if you look at the pictures and watch the videos. And they were literally former textile workers.
Of all the stories that you found out through this research, was there one that you really loved, or one that you really brought it home for you, how immense this mission was?
I was chasing something to do with parachutes, and I don't even remember what question I was trying to answer. And I found this incredible, 55-year-old story about the men and women who folded the Apollo parachutes. You have to be licensed by the FAA to fold those, and they actually they re-examine you every 6 months to make sure you're doing it right and know what you're doing. There were only 3 people in the whole country who had been trained and then licensed to fold Apollo parachutes, 2 men and a woman in California. And they were so important to NASA and to Apollo that NASA forbid the 3 of them to ride in the same car together because they didn't want them injured in the same, they couldn't afford to have them injured in the same accident. Well, that's just a wonderful story.
We're in a space race again with China this time.
This is, in fact, the most exciting moment, I think, in space since Apollo. And what's exciting is not, unfortunately, what NASA's doing. What's exciting is what's happening with private companies, what Elon Musk is doing with SpaceX, what Jeff Bezos is doing with Blue Origin. As we speak, only about 550 people have been to space total during the entire space age. If you go back to the era of Apollo, we haven't even launched 1 person a month to space, about 9 a year for the last 50 years. That's not the space age. That's not the Jetsons. That's not the USS Enterprise. But I think 50 years from now, we will look back at this moment, at this anniversary, and say, that was the moment when things started to change again.
Forward.
Text Fishman to 31996 to hear more of his Apollo stories, or download our Talking with Authors podcast.